back and check it out. Was Ashanti Branch one of the speakers today, a keynote for this morning, or a different time during the conference? Does anybody know?
Shanti led a workshop yesterday.
Oh, he led a workshop. Okay, I thought he was one of the speakers. Okay,
no,
cool.
He was doing the unmasking talk you guys.
Oh, yeah, I definitely want to go back and see that. I haven't seen him in a minute. Hey.
All right.
It's good to know we have an iPhone participant here, A. Jorgensen, going by the name on the screen.
Yes, this is Aaron. Sorry, I'm today.
Aaron, great.
I came in a little early because I just want to let you know I have a district meeting I need to be a part of, but I didn't want to miss this, so I'm going to try to get some of both. But I didn't want to miss this.
Oh, great. Well, thank you for letting us know, Aaron. And we'll keep that in mind in terms of, we'll be doing some screen sharing and stuff, but I know that this will be recorded as well if you need to go back and reference anything. I know how that life is, Aaron, so.
Thank you.
No problem. Okay, we're comfortable, Rosa, if we need to get started.
Great. Good morning, everyone. My name is Rosa Palomino, and I'm going to be your room monitor today. I'm really excited to be a part of this group, to be honest with you. So just wanted to let you know that we will be recording this session. So please make sure that if you have any questions, you put them in the chat as well. And then towards the end of the session, I will also drop the survey link into the chat box. So without further ado, I would let your facilitators take on the lead here. I'm excited.
Yay. Thank you, Rosa. Thank you so very much. Welcome, everybody. I know we're in day 2 of a pretty incredible experience here with the ACT conference, and we are excited, Laura and I, to be here to kick off and guide through some engagement around expansive allyship around SOGIE, what we call SOGIE, which is sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression. And focusing around distance learning and beyond, because we know that's kind of where we're existing in a lot of education spaces right now. So I'm just going to share a little bit about who I am. My name is Kiku Johnson. I am the Executive Director of Rainbow Community Center of Contra Costa County. We do have a brick and mortar building, though we haven't been at it for most of this year, that exists in Concord in the county. And Laura and I both live in Oakland, here in Alameda County, just to give you some understanding of where we're zooming in from to connect with you today. And in terms of why I'm excited to be here, I want you all to know that doing this work around LGBTQI identity, presence, representation, and affirmation is something that's been really close to my own experience, and also the work that I know that has been unfolding pretty progressively, I would say, in the last few years. And I know that we're here in the Bay Area. Lauren and I we originally hail from Michigan in the Midwest. So we've been out here for about 16 years, and it's beautiful to be out here, especially as we are in post-election. I'm a little leery about saying post. I know we're still waiting for a lot of information to come in. So I just want to acknowledge that folks are holding a lot, I'm sure, in different ways, concurrently, as we've been had to do for the last most part of the year. So I just want to acknowledge, you're coming to the screen, and I know a lot of us are on screens a lot. So we're very aware of that, knowing that the topic today, what we're focusing around. A lot of my experience has been really interesting around the last 10 years, being lucky to travel the country and be able to speak and lead workshops and connect and collaborate with a lot of sectors, everywhere from juvenile justice to education, to faith-based, community-based orgs, a lot of mental health, and a lot of focus around schools and kind of learning where folks are at around the topic of SOGIE, and looking at why this work needs to continue to be educating all of us. So that has been a lot of my experience in the last 10 years with 2 other orgs, being able to write curriculum, travel the country, focus on restorative healing, circle practice, and Also working in a lot of girls leadership environments. So literally working for an org called Girls Leadership, which is based out of West Oakland here. That's national. And then previously with Girls Incorporated, which is very close to my heart for nearly 10 years in a lot of different roles. So I learned by just jumping into most things, from grant writing to organizing, and definitely I have a passion for putting out material and content around our topic. So, one of the things that I think is important to also share with you all, I do use he, him, his pronouns, and I'll be throwing that in my name in a moment on the screen. And I'm someone who identifies as an out transgender male. So I'm someone who was assigned female at birth, and I hold several intersections that a lot of times are very marginalized and set up in certain ways. When I meet people, definitely on the screen, I like to share because I think visibility and again, representation is so important, not only in this time, but in community in general. So could definitely say a lot more, but I think there'll be some fun shares with Laura as I pass it over to her about where she comes from and why she's here today.
Hi, everybody. And I do want to acknowledge I have a very excited cat in the room right now that keeps howling. So if that happens while I'm talking, please be kind. My name's Laura. I use she, her pronouns. I identify as queer. I have been living here with Kiku. Kiku is my partner in life. We've been together for almost 18 years, and we've gone through transition together. As he mentioned, through his transition, and then just our transition as a couple through that. So that's just something to know about us. And I have been based doing youth work for over 25 years. I've worked in several nonprofits, and also for the last 10 years, I worked as the social emotional learning teacher at a middle school. I wrote the curriculum, I co-taught with the school counselor, and specifically taught gender studies, led the GSA at my school, also worked really around mental health and suicide prevention with our youth. So this is a really important topic to me, and as personally, and then also because professionally, after I worked at that school for so long, it really became clear to me that I wanted to focus more closely on LGBTQ youth as a whole. And so starting to do more training, reaching out to educators, again, traveling with Kiku across the country. We did some work with different administrators, helping write policy, really going in and trying to help make some different systemic change in our settings. So I'm really excited to be here with all of you today. I mostly want to come in with gratitude because I know what it takes to be a teacher without everything that's happening right now in our world, and that is a heavy lift. And so knowing that we're in this new place, in this new world, and we're on the screens, and the care and the heart and the dedication that you bring is the same, plus 10. I just want to start with gratitude and invite you all to be here with us today and to take care of yourselves as you need to. I'll pass it back to Kiku.
Yay. I'm going to share a screen because we do have a presentation to be able to guide us through this conversation today. And with that, I know that one of the things that's really helpful is just to understand, where are we coming from? What is Rainbow Community Center? And just being able to share that with you. We have a beautiful video. It's a little bit less than 3 minutes, just so that you all know what to expect with that. Ooh, I just want to make sure I got the sound in there. That's always the fun thing that matters to me greatly, is that we have optimized sound because we do have audio in the video. So here we go. So hang back for a moment and just enjoy a little bit about who we are and where we're coming from and who we serve. Oh, it's that fun thing where I hid the slide, Laura. I'm gonna go ahead and undo that. You think you're being crafty sometimes, doing things, setting yourself up, and then one little change in a setting can dictate where you are. All right. Here, where we're focusing in this hour, because we know it's going to go very quickly. And we're going to be doing a check-in in a moment. I'm going to be launching into what is SOGIE a little bit more deeply, and we will be sharing a resource with you. And then we'll be really hunkering down around, distance learning strategies in this time. And then being able to experience a little bit of a new concept around what is expansive allyship versus being inclusive, and how that gets transcended. So we're excited to have you along today together to have this conversation. And everything we do is going to be role modeling the work that we would love to pass on to you. I think the best opportunities and conference experiences is if you can walk out with nuggets that you can put into action right away. So we kept that in mind as we were building this experience for you. And so one of those things is, we always have group agreements or contracts. And I'm sure this is familiar to all of you. We've kind of made a simple version here that really kind of showcases where we focus, some of the ways in which we want to have agreements around how we're going to show up in space. So you may have heard the phrase, this is a safe space. And with Rainbow, we really look at, that's not something that we can ensure, that we can guarantee. And we want to be able to set up young people and anybody that we're working with the idea of, we can come to this space and be brave and know that things may happen in the space that could be triggering, it could hurt, it could bring up stuff in our lives, and we don't know that with each other. So that if we can kind of come to this space with a knowingness around when things are shared, so dovetailing into the second one of what does it mean to have a confidential space. I like to say that you can take the information that you learn here and definitely move it forward. And the people and the identities, they're not as important all the time. I think that when we're using names or when we're using identifiers that can really out somebody, and I don't mean just in terms of LGBTQI identities, but out them in terms of the space where they might go to school, who they are a part of in terms of family, all of those identifiers. If that's not important to the story, when sharing information forward, we like to say, let's keep that confidential in this space. So just imagine how that can emanate outside of this conversation. So with that, also using I statements and speaking from our own experiences around things. We don't tend to want to give advice, but more so share kind of how things have worked for us in our time. And then also making, taking, and sharing space. This is an accessibility way that we like to say things around how to invite people to show up and participate. So instead of saying step up or step back or lean in and lean out, we know that we don't know everybody's access needs when they come into a space. So that's why we use this language. And then the last thing is respecting feelings, as all feelings are valid. And I think that there's a lot of times I've heard in group agreements, and I've been one of those purveyors as well, that the golden rule is something that I think gets said a lot. And I know for me, someone who has been through trauma in the world, that the golden rule doesn't necessarily resonate with me or make sense. So I imagine if I'm working with young people or colleagues and I say that as a blanket statement, that might not mean the same for somebody else around being able to be treated the way others treat them. That could get really problematic. So we like to acknowledge that if there are feelings coming up, that they are valid, no matter what they are, because they're yours. So we would like to just ask as a group that if this resonates with you, we can roll in this session with a thumbs up, thumbs to the side, or thumbs down. And you're welcome to throw that in the chat if you're not on video, or go ahead and put that image up if you are so adept at using the thumbs up. You can see that Glenna has an example, and so does Judith, if you know how to use that fun function. I like the double Aaron with the using the emoji and the actual live. So perfect. And I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Laura to be able to do a check-in example with us.
All right, so what you are seeing on the screen, if those of you were with us yesterday, you had an experience of doing a student-created 1 through 10 check-in. So I wanted to share this with you for those of you who are doing check-ins with your students as an idea that you can do. Students in my class We would check in at the beginning of every class, either using, you know, an emotional check-in where they share emotions, or when they would do a 1 through 10 or a weather report, or the different types of check-ins you can do with young people. This was created by a student. We would have a project where students would create a 1 through 10 list, 1 being the lowest low and 10 being the best day ever. And then we would share these sometimes as student-led check-ins where people could check in 1 through 10 on how they're feeling today, and sharing based on this scale. So this is a cupcake scale. I wasn't quite up for cupcakes yesterday, so we started with vegetables yesterday. So today we're gonna go with cupcakes. And when you check in using this type of check-in, you can say, you know, today I'm feeling like, I'll just role model it. Today I'm feeling like a 7, a blueberry cupcake. So even if your absolute favorite cupcake is chocolate, you check in as the student would have intended it for the 7. So oftentimes when we would do this with kids, they would say, well, I'm a 7 blueberry, but I really love funfetti. So that's how they might check in and use that. So I wanted to offer this for us to hear how people are landing today and where they are in a scale of 1 to 10. So if you take a minute to yourself and just notice how you feel, and then you can enter it into the chat and we can kind of see where people are at in our space today. We've got about 15 strong in here. You can put the number, you could put the cupcake. If you really want to tell us your favorite cupcake, because now you're getting hungry for lunch, you can also do that. Oh, we've got a funfetti in the house. It's been a minute since I've heard a 10. So I'm excited, and maybe I'll build off some of that energy. Look at this, we're all pretty high. This is great. Ooh, I like this, mixing it up. And that's something also when doing student-led check-ins that I would recommend is sometimes you're feeling a mix of things. Sometimes we would also, especially with middle schoolers who really like to talk about their physical feelings more than their emotional feelings sometimes, we would say, okay, you can do a physical check-in and an emotional check-in. And this was a way where they could be like, because they usually, you know, I'm so tired, I'm so hungry, I'm so tired, I'm so hungry, is what we hear a lot from our middle school students. So being able to give them choice to say, okay, tell me your physical one first, and then let's share how we're doing emotionally. I also wanted to recommend this, something that myself and the school counselor would do quite often. We would be really explicit with young people when we do 1 through 10 check-ins. If you check in as a 1 or a 2, you are signaling to us that you want someone to check in with you. You are signaling. And so we want you to signal to us. If you want someone to check in with you, just know if you say I'm a 1 or a 2, chances are one of us is going to check in with you and say, hey, I'm concerned. What's going on? Do you want to check in? So I wanted to offer that to you because I would tell this to parents, and parents would say, well, no one's ever going to really do that. They're not going to really tell you they're a 1 or a 2. And I was like, you'd be surprised if you set up a system with young people and they get a clue that if I tell you this, you're going to care about me and you're going to come check in with me. You'd be surprised how many will take that invitation. And I wanted to offer that to you because I think sometimes we shy away from telling kids exactly what it means. But we would say, if you're a 1 or a 2, you're going to hear from a teacher because we love you and we care about you. And we want you to know you can signal us at any time. So I wanted to offer that to you all as we start our time together. Kiku?
You heard me mention a little bit at the beginning around SOGIE, and I don't know what folks' familiarity with this acronym is, so I'm going to go based on that maybe it's new. And thinking about the acronym LGBTQI+, you know, I know we're familiar with lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer questioning, and intersex, and then plus. And the plus there for me, how that shows up is, you know, I was able to read a really great issue of National Geographic from January 2017. It's the gender issue. I highly promote it. It has a teacher's toolkit that goes with it that's online. And there's an article in there around gender and focused on the intersections around sexuality and gender identities. And the beautiful thing is at that time, and this is nearly 4 years ago now, that there were over 500 terms that identify different sorts of ways people show up in their identities around sexuality, around gender and gender expression. So what I like to say is that the adults are catching up. And as we've been traveling the country, it's very clear to me a lot of the fear that shows up with adults who work with young people and with anybody is that they're going to mess up, that they're going to say the wrong word, the wrong pronoun, learn something, and then the young person might be shifting identities. They're exploring. And that's the beautiful part of it. So if there was 500 nearly 4 years ago, I can only imagine now how many different types of words and identities are out there for folks to be able to explore and understand. Back when I was coming out, the first time I came out in the early 90s, at the time was very reluctant lesbian in a female body. I know for me that it was the rainbow flag, like that's what I knew. And there are very few language words being put out there that I could access in terms of how do I identify. And SOGIE, sexual orientation, gender identity and expression, what I love about SOGIE is that everybody has a SOGIE. And we get to get out of a space where we're othering, whether intentional or not, around the other people who are LGBTQI identified. That's a separate population in any kind of way to be regarding it in that way. I think it's more possible and there's more opportunities to be thinking about SOGIE, because no matter if you are agender or asexual, you still have a SOGIE, and that your SOGIE can shift based on where you fall along the different spectral lines. So SOGIE is a great way to invite people in for a conversation, because they can be thinking about immediately, how do I show up? Versus how can I be an educator, or how can I be learning about somebody else? I think it encourages participation by the reader and the person engaging. So this handbook here is free and open source. I was very fortunate to be invited to write this about 2 years ago. And it is meant to be for providers who work with anybody. It is framed for restorative healing circles, but as you can imagine, it translates quite easily. It has a beautiful directory in the front of language terms around identities, and also a separate directory around language around concepts. I decided to split them out. I wrote this at the time because I did research and I didn't find a resource out there that was having the conversation in addition to intersection, implicit bias, allyship, dominant narratives, and what I like to call the expansive approach, which again, we'll explore towards the end of today's session. But I do want you to know it's there. It's very accessible in terms of the languaging. It will talk with you about how to set up group agreements, how to look at and consider bathroom signs and access, and I know we're virtual right now, but these things are really important education points, how to market your program, in terms of flyers, even if they're virtual right now, what kind of language to be putting on there that's affirming and inviting, and really getting out of a binary mindset. So there's a lot of great stuff in here, a bias quiz as well for you to be exploring kind of how you show up. So please know that that will be, if not already in the chat, that will get added for you to click on. And it's also part of the presentation. So I wanted to be able to let you know that the CDC supported this getting written alongside of New York State Department of Health and Cornell. And I only mention those not to name drop, but more so to share with you that collaboratively how important it is that institutions and systems are working together to promote more expansive mindset of how we show up with one another. So that's a great resource for you to have. And I know that Laura is going to do an activity with you all right now that I'm actually really excited to participate in as well.
Thank you, Kiku. You can go ahead and go to the next slide for us, Kiku, if you're still sharing. Yeah.
Oh, he likes to click on the book.
Yeah.
All right.
You can go to the next one, actually. We'll move it along. Awesome. So we're going to have a moment. We want to be able to hear some voices and what's going on for folks. So we're going to go into some breakout rooms for about 8 minutes. And you'll have 3 people in your room. And what we'd like to discuss are what are some concerns and trends you are noticing with LGBTQI students during distance learning, and have a conversation with folks. And if it leads to this, also maybe what are some of the things that you're doing to support the students? And we're going to come back and have some dialogue and also an opportunity to look at some strategies. But we're going to go to breakout rooms. And also, because Kiku mentioned as well that we are modeling ways you can do things today, we are going to send you into breakout rooms, and we have named our breakout rooms after some Black and queer LGBTQ pioneers in history. So your room name will be named after a namesake. And if you don't know who that person is, that's your homework today, is to Google them later and find out who this representation is for you. And this is just one example of how you can bring a topic like an LGBTQ hero into your classroom in a small way that brings visibility. So I'm going to send you off for 8 minutes and 2 or 3 people in a room to discuss what are some concerns and trends you might be noticing with your LGBTQ students. And here we go. Back with us shortly. I'm sure they're all excited to be talking to each other. That's the one thing about these short sessions. You don't get a lot of sometimes opportunity to talk to others. And I can always tell by how long it takes for people to come back that they're hanging on to that last second.
There's more to
They're
say.
hanging on to the last second. Hello, everybody. As you're coming back, it would be great if you could put maybe some themes, that came up in the chat, so that we can be aware of them from your groups. I know we had an interesting conversation in my group. So as you come back, if you'd like to add some themes, like what were some of the themes that were in your conversation in the chat? And as Kiku and I go through the rest of the presentation, we'll try to address some of those themes.
All right. I am going to share the screen again. Here we go. I had a really engaging conversation in my room. We were just commenting, I really love, and when there's not enough time, it just, to me, speaks volumes about how we get to continue these conversations when we return with our colleagues and other folks around us. So here we go. Hopefully folks can see the screen here. I'm going to be sharing a little bit around the Trevor Project. Like with any good conversation on topics, it's always good to understand where the needs are. You know, why are we doing this work? Why are we even talking about this? And if you're not familiar with the Trevor Project, it developed in the mid-90s. It was a result of an incredible 18-minute short film that was put out in the early 90s. That I encourage you to go to their website. You can view it for free. And it pretty much tells a story, a fictional story, but we know that there's so many aspects that resonate in real life. A young man that's in middle school and kind of his journey embracing who he is. And it deals a lot with suicidal ideation. So I just want to put that out there for awareness. And the reason why I really love the Trevor Project, not only did they go on to continue to do supportive work, they have grown to a place where they really focus on research and being able to put forth initiatives that I think are really helpful. And if you go to their website, they have great tiles that you can click on that have to do with working with young people right now in this time. So I wanted to share some really helpful aspects of a research report they put out a couple months into COVID. So this is actually more recent around how is this time impacting our LGBTQI plus identified young people. Because it is greatly isolating them in a different way, where a lot of our young people are being forced to go back into the closet, not be able to express themselves in their homes if they are housed. And then we're seeing a huge influx and increase, especially with Rainbow Community Center, with the amount of young people that are getting put out of their homes because of their identities and having to hold them. And you can imagine the amount of stress that increases when you're facing not having stability in housing. So we're seeing a lot of consequences around the physical distancing because they don't have the access anymore to even explore positive interactions in terms of school. And they're actually experiencing so many more negative ones on the screen and not wanting to show up. And they're worried about their families and around economics in terms of, are we going to be all right? How are we going to persist, even with housing there as well, and food stability? And then we're talking about intersections too. So we know that compounded, that you have a young person and they could be holding other identities and socioeconomic statuses that can really impact how quickly they can be moving to places where there's depression and anxiety developing or compounding at a greater rate. So they're worried about what's going to happen in the future, let alone what's happening in this day that they're in. And they're worried about the people that they love. And you can imagine with this election right now and all of the conversations that are happening in the media, and they are someone in the world as young people that are prolific in terms of their diet of social media and media in general. So without that balance of being able to mitigate and have conversations about what they're taking in as easily and as often, it's a lot of added weight that they're carrying around. And their supports that they need really center around assistance in figuring out how to access resources. We've heard a lot from young people that they end up going quicker to suicidal ideation and other self-harming behaviors because they've either tried to make a call or they don't even know who to call. And can they pick up a phone? Can they be on a screen in a place that's confidential and that they can feel like they can talk with somebody, be in a support group, be in a GSA that might be meeting after school or even during school hours? The implications are just greater right now because they're witnessed differently in their home. So just to keep those things in mind right now of how are our young people that are LGBTQI plus impacted more during the time of being sheltered. We would be remiss if we didn't share some really hard and fast statistics about this impact right now. And knowing that 40% of the respondents of young people in this survey have already considered suicide. And it, again, cascades over pre-COVID time and the increase during COVID and being sheltered. And this is that second bullet that I was really trying to get at in terms of 46% of these young people have reported that they've wanted to access mental health support, but they were unable to really traverse through those steps. So us thinking about how are we scaffolding and helping our young people by being more forward communicating with resources, even when they're not asking for it. We don't have the same walls in a classroom and the hallways to advertise, so we need to be really creative about how we're putting that information out there because we can't read as much as we normally have been before this. We're seeing maybe chest up, you know, and behaviors, and sometimes when the video is not on. There's so many aspects to how things are showing up right now for this particular population. And like what I was talking about with being kicked out of their homes, there's an increase during this time. What can we do? That's always where I'd like to make sure that we start to move into. What can we do to increase those protective factors right now? I was on a call, a presentation around suicidal ideation around our population about a month ago. And one person asked very assertively, what can we be doing? They were very desperate. It was very clear to me that folks are really grappling with what can I put forth right now? And simply what I said was affirmation and representation. And it was something we had to really dig into. And what does that look like to affirm? And we're going to be looking at different practices around how we can do that right now, by putting our pronouns on the screen, by being able to use the language and saying it, not being afraid of the language, including it in our content as examples, and not always being heteronormative with what's in the textbooks or what's being provided, and actually looking at a lens, through a lens that you're really looking for that to change it, to infuse it differently. A lot of our trans and non-binary youth have reported that their pronouns being respected by most people in their lives will reduce their attempt at suicide by half who didn't have their pronouns respected. That to me is profound, that much of an impact just by affirming the use of pronouns that are preferred by that young person. 12% of those reported at least one person in their space has attempted suicide in the past year, compared to 20 without someone in their space that's affirming. Also significant, because these are averages, right? This is a difference between having someone who's just affirming in the space versus not having access to someone who's affirming. Space even being virtual. So just keep that in mind. Again, all the links are at the bottom of each slide for all this information that we've kind of summarized here. And I'd love to be able to have Laura share some really helpful practices too around distance learning. You're muted, Laura.
Thank you.
Yes.
It's like the line of 2020, you're muted. So anyway, so a few things that you can do right now. If you have a classroom landing page, you can make sure that it's inviting, has rainbows, has resources on bookshelves that they can go to passively and see that they are represented. In your email and digital communications, you can include your own pronouns. You can also include crisis support phone numbers, texting and chat information of where people can get help, so that every time a student receives an email from you, they are also receiving those numbers. I would also recommend, I did this with my students, is I would have days, depending on what we were talking about in class, but if we were doing something around mental health, or if we were even having a conversation about a character in a book that was experiencing depression, that would be a day that I would ask every child to bring their cell phone to class, because we're going to enter the crisis hotline number into our cell phones today together. You might not think you'll ever call it, but that's the point. You might not know when you're going to need it or when you're going to need to call for a friend. So I would actually do that as part of my classroom time with the students. Every single year, I would put it into one of my lessons and we would enter crisis information into our phones. So that is something you can do. And it's not to scare kids, it's just to make sure they have it accessible for if and when the time comes. You can also make sure that you're wearing clothes that represent things. Wear a pin, put something in your background, use a virtual background. Keep doing things that you think are going to help bring visibility. And we can go to the next slide, Kiku. Secondly, something that we know helps with all school culture and climate is having class agreements that the students help co-create. Many of you are probably already doing this already. What I would recommend is bringing it back out. So where I see people make, kind of make this not as intentional as it could be, is after you create these, they post them on the wall. It's like it's posted and forgotten. What I would do is bring them back into your class and say, how are we doing with our agreements? And pick one. Say they have one of their agreements is around respecting people's differences and respecting different ideas. Bring that up one day and say, let's check in about this. How are we doing with this? Are we being respectful to people? Are we doing what we said we were going to do as a group? And make them be alive. So if you are doing class agreements, my challenge to you would be to make them live. Make them live in your everyday language. Bring them back up. Ask people if it's still necessary or if we still need it. And we can go to the next slide, Kiku. Thanks for being the mover. One recommendation that if you haven't been doing it already is to survey your students. And you'll be receiving this as well, so you don't need to take all the notes down if you're worried about missing something. If your survey is centered in empathy and open-ended questions, you will find out the information that you need to support the students better. It may not work all of the time, but having an open-ended question will help make sure that you provide what you need for that student. It may be different than you think. We get worried because our kids might feel isolated. We get worried because they might not be able to use the pronouns or the name that they want in conjunction in their home with their family. But you being someone who knows this is just as effective as affirming out loud. So if you know this, that student's going to feel a connection to you. That student's going to have one affirming adult. That student is going to have less of a mental health risk. So I want to affirm that if you're doing things like this, you are making a difference. So these are some questions that you can ask in those surveys. These are some things that you can do that will do no harm and will only inform you and help that student feel seen, even if the student doesn't disclose. Even if they do not disclose the information to you, they will know that you are a safer adult. We can move to the next one, Kiku. This one's a big one. So providing office hours. Oh, where'd we go? We're almost there, Kiku. Oh, pronouns checklist. We're going to go to offer support, yeah. So offering support, providing office hours to check in after school, even if no one attends it. It's okay.
Sorry, I'm also responding in the chat. So I think my return key is like,
Oh, it's okay.
my
You can go
acknowledgement.
two more ahead. Thank you. So continuing your GSAs and affinity groups, even if no one attends. So I know folks are concerned, how do we get them to come? You might not be able to get them to come, but what you can do is continue to do what research shows works. Just having a GSA presence helps the culture and climate at your school be safer for students. It is research-based. You do not have to have a high attendance for that to be something that helps. And so I want to affirm folks that as we're going through this time, you will figure out as we go, and kids will figure out how to get to the spaces that they need. Asking them maybe if a different time of day might help, asking them if a different kind of name of the group might help. Things like that could be something you could try. But the most important piece is that just the presence alone will decrease suicide risk and suicide ideation for our LGBTQ youth. So that's really important to know. Offer outside resources, as we mentioned. Share things like the Trevor Lifeline. Talk about things out loud. Don't be afraid to give a student, every student, a crisis hotline number. Share that what we do at Rainbow. We offer virtual youth programs. We have clinical services. We just did a huge Pride online. There are things happening that people can passively participate in as well as actively participate in. So Kiku, I think we can, let's see, we're getting close to our end here. So I'm going to do one more slide and then pass it to Kiku to close. But affirming intervention strategies. So we do want to make sure that we are intervening when we hear or experience behavior that is discriminatory. So one thing that's really important is to always address it every single time, out loud, in front of folks. And then you can go back and address the person privately who did it, who might have done the harm. And you also need to reach out privately to the person who may have been targeted. But we want to encourage folks to really consider, what are my practices going to be, and how can I be someone who every time I see, witness, or experience behavior in my classroom with students, that I am speaking up and I am saying something in the moment. So this is the real encouragement here, is to make sure that we are being those kinds of allies, because I promise you the LGBTQ kids are listening. I promise you. And even if it wasn't a situation directed at them, they will know you are a safe adult. And that is what we are looking for, is safe adults for them to be aware of. All right, Kiku.
Yay. It's amazing how much we can be talking about in a short amount of time.
I know.
Effective allyship. These are ways that you can be engaging right now. Looking at your own biases. Again, in the SOGIE handbook, you want to have an experience going through a 14-point bias quiz for yourself. You get to do that personally for you and investigate what shows up for you. And look at your reactions to that. I think, as we're looking at social emotional learning and feelings and emotions and what's showing up for us, it's important for us to take that in. What are those moments right after we realize something about a natural reaction? We need to address that, connect with what those emotions are. And because normally, there's these choices. We usually move, we fight with it, or we freeze in the moment. So thinking about what is it that we want to be doing when we're presented with information showing up that maybe we're seeing or we're not seeing. Continue your learning. Find the ways in which that you can access more resources. The SOGIE handbook is one thing. And what I know about resources and tools is that unless it's connected, it's hard for you because there's so much out there. We live in a world that you can go and Google anything. So sometimes having things recommended or things that people are using that are practical on the ground right now, or on the screen, if you will, this is what's important. So think about where you're learning. Intervene. This is more than being an upstander. It's a little bit of what Laura just said with the slide before. Make those risks for yourself and say something, even if you don't know if what you're saying in the moment is exactly what you want to say. I think acknowledging and disrupting will help people understand, okay, I can have the ability and I can engage in an interrupting as well. Using ouch and oops, if you don't have the right words, whatever the words that you want to acknowledge for your group, just so that there's an option to choose that, because when there's not an option, it's not chosen, it's not felt like that they can do anything and have a choice. Use everyday opportunities. We talked about pronouns, inclusive language and greetings, welcome, instead of, and I've worked in a lot of girls programs, and I've had to really work on that. It isn't about all girls. It's not about all, I like to say folks. I know, Laura, when you were in school, you did a lot with beautiful humans, creative artists. There's so many fun ways, and you can come up and make your own list. Have your young people help co-create that with you. Educate yourself on appropriate stress reduction and empowerment strategies. Use the tools that you're already using. Ask for your young people to share some too. The power of contribution really is a motivator for young folks. I want to end with transcending inclusive to expansive. We hear a lot about how there's DEI, diversity, education, and inclusion work, and a lot of companies hiring folks to be those brokers, to bring in folks that will help educate their staff, their employees. And we hear a lot, is this inclusive? Are we being inclusive enough? When I hear the word inclusive, the way that it starts to change for me over time is that there's always a power dynamic with the word inclusive. Someone has the choice to include something or not. We want to eliminate the power dynamic. How to do that? One recommended way is to think more expansively. How do you build the space that you want people to come to even though they're not there yet? What is that going to involve? What ingredients do you need to put into play? You don't have folks that are Muslim in your group, but you want to make sure you're educating around different cultures. You bring in lessons, you look at your content. What's missing? Do you have LGBTQI plus presence there? Are there options for young people to choose and know other types of dominant narratives don't need to be dictating all the time? It doesn't always have to be heteronormative in examples in what you give in terms of vignettes, the types of literature you choose to share, excerpts, quotes. Look at how you can be diversifying and showing other voices, including and especially ones that are not your own. And asking young people in your settings, depending on developmental level, what resources, what are they using as their diet and how they're taking in things? What are they using in terms of content and what kind of influences them? So think about, are you being inclusive and to what point, and where is their value for you to build it so they will come? If any of you are fans of that movie from the late 80s, Field of Dreams, with our good old Kevin Costner back in the day, it's that concept of building something that you really want to manifest with your young people in your space, with your colleagues. You have to put forth settings that are going to reflect what you want to have in that setting. Because a true ally really does strive to transcend from being inclusive to expansive in the work. That's a big concept I know that I'm throwing at you in the last moment. Please know that it's also detailed in the SOGIE handbook, and there's actually examples given on how to do that. So you can look at here, there are ways to preserve others' dignity and rights. Again, by simply having a flag up behind you or using that in your language around asking if there are other examples around things or people that they know in community. We know our young people love YouTubers, and they know YouTubers from about every type of practice and creative type of art that's out there. So you can probably rely that they know people that are diverse in terms of how they present with their gender, how they talk about sexuality. Just letting young people know that you got their back. That's a simple way to be an expansive ally. It helps open the door to a conversation differently. As we exit, this is like so flash fast. We're used to doing things that are 2 to 3 to 8 hours long, and really diving into activities and engagement and processing. So I so appreciate, I know Laura and I really love to have this opportunity to engage with you all this way and share information. If there's an action that you really resonate with today, if you could throw that in the chat where you're like, ooh, this is something I picked up from this hour, or an activity that we did today, or an appreciation that you have for anybody. This is not directed for just Laura and myself. This is actually more about starting to think more expansively. Is there a young person you've been working with or a colleague that you need to give some love to differently, or affirm and represent in a different way? Think about one of those things, or all of them if you're feeling so inspired, to put into the chat so that we can be inspiring each other about how we do the work. Laura, do you want to say any closing things there?
Just to say thank you for choosing to be at our workshop today and focusing on LGBTQ youth. I love what I'm hearing in the chat here. I also want to let you know that we do offer individual opportunities. So if you want to come and increase your fluency in allyship, we have a workshop series in the spring. And you can contact me or go to our website to register for that. We also have ongoing professional development groups that we're creating. Kiku, if you advance it, they'll be able to see it. So if you know an LGBTQ educator who might want to have a professional group with other LGBTQ educators, we are offering an ongoing group for those who identify LGBT and also are in education. And this is going to be starting in February. And we also have an ongoing group on the next slide for our allies in education. And so this is any identity. If you're an ally and you're really wanting to continue your allyship to LGBTQ youth, you can come to a group like this and get professional development ongoing through Rainbow. And down the road, we're going to be having some curricula sets that will be digital. So hopefully we'll be able to support you also in your curriculum development. And I wish this was like a full day. We had to hustle, but I'm really happy we got to be here with all of you today.
Yeah.
We're going to hang out for a few minutes. If anybody wants to engage any further, we're here.
Please don't forget to complete the evaluation. I said it, put it into the comments or the chat section. So also, if you are playing the game, make sure to enter the password workshop for additional points.
Ooh.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of want to be playing this game.
No, I feel so late to it. Thank you, Kiko and Laura, so much for everything.
Yes, thank you. This is a very rich topic today, and I'm sure very